Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the NSPA webinar today. We have a great turnout and look forward to an informative presentation on strategies for supporting undocumented students. My name is Maggie Brubaker and I'm the Membership and Programs Manager at NSPA. I would also like to welcome and introduce today's presenters, Jay Sherwin and Jose Ariola from Educators for Fair Consideration. Jay is the co-director of the Invest in the Dream project, and Jose is the Training and Community Relations Manager there. There are a few technical items I'd like to go through before we begin. First, you can hear me, but I cannot hear you. However, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, there's a question box at the very bottom of the expanded control panel. You can click on the orange arrow to expand or collapse your control panel. When you type in your questions, they will go directly to me, and I'll address them as they come through or read them to our presenters at the end of the webinar. I will now turn it over to Jay and Jose. Thanks a lot.
Maggie, thank you very much. Jose, are you there with me as well?
Yes, I'm here, Jay.
So good morning or good afternoon to everyone who's joined us from around the country. We're delighted to have you with us. Jose and I, as you know, are from Educators for Fair Consideration, an organization based in San Francisco that advocates for undocumented students and tries to improve their opportunity for pursuing higher education. We met many NSPA members at the NSPA conference in Pittsburgh last fall, where we presented a version of today's presentation, but we wanted to be able to offer some additional thoughts about ways to effectively serve undocumented students to help you understand what that population is and some of the challenges that they confront, to talk a little bit about best practices for awarding scholarships to students, for building community support to help serve them. So we hope it will be an interesting hour for all of you. Our goal is to talk about 45 minutes of the hour and then leave plenty of time for questions that I know Maggie is collecting. So Jose has the slides in front of him. He'll be driving the slides, and the first few segments he'll be leading. And so Jose, let me pass it over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Jay. I appreciate it. So just to quickly go over our agenda for today, what we wanted to cover. So we wanted to give folks a very brief overview of just undocumented students, undocumented young people in the community, to give some basic background information. Then we're going to get into some just important legal and political issues surrounding our community. Then we're going to share a little bit about what it means to build community support, in particular from our perspective, working with some of our Invest in the Dream grantees, other scholarship providers around the country, as well as other organizations that we've worked with. And then we are excited to provide some best practices on how to serve undocumented students from some of the top organizations, at least in our mind, when it comes to supporting and serving undocumented students. We'll introduce a little bit about our Invest in the Dream initiative, and then we'll, like Jay had mentioned, we're going to open the rest of the time for Q&A. So we are going to go through a tremendous amount of information as quickly as we can in the time that we have together, but we really look forward to all of your questions. And also, you will obviously have both Jay and I's contact information. If you all have further information or further questions, anything you'd like to ask, you certainly are more than welcome to reach out to us for that. And again, thank you all for joining. And again, my name is Jose Ariola, and I serve as the Training and Community Relations Manager at E4FC. It's been a privilege as an undocumented person myself to support both organizations in building their capacity to support undocumented folks, and also to support undocumented folks specifically in their own leadership development over the course of my 5 years here at E4FC. So just to provide some background here, and we got the next slide. So we're going to start really, really basic in terms of what does it mean to be undocumented. So there are basically three ways that breaks down. So to be undocumented in the United States, to not have lawful authorization by the United States government to be present and reside in the United States. And that happens in three different ways. One is folks enter without authorization. So that means folks, however it is, they were able to cross the border, at which point they become undocumented. That's about 50% of the undocumented community in the United States. The other 50% actually enter with authorization, with a particular visa, and then because of the complexities of our immigration system, are not able to renew or adjust that status to a different status that will allow folks to stay. So at which point they become undocumented as well. So that's actually the path that me and my family took. We came on a visa and then we're not able to renew it or adjust it, at which point we became undocumented. And then there are a small percentage of folks that are in the process of being able to pursue a legal status, but until they're approved, they're still considered undocumented. So this is kind of how it breaks down, 50-50. They enter without authorization and 50% enter with authorization. Speaking a little more broadly to the complexities of our immigration system, I think this is a very helpful and powerful diagram that is meant to show the complexities of what it means to be able to gain legal immigration status. And as you can see, I'm not going to go over the diagram. Folks are welcome to take a look at it, but there's a lot of pathways for folks. And oftentimes those pathways result in either not being able to move forward with a process or being deported or removed from the United States. So it's not an incredibly accessible process for the vast majority of immigrants in the United States. As a population estimate, we have a total of about between 11 and 12 million people in the United States that are undocumented. We have some of the estimates broken down here. Again, these are just estimates. As you can see, a huge population, the majority of the population is from Mexico or from Central and South America. But we also have a very large percentage of folks, or a very large population of folks that come from non-Mexican or non-Central and South American countries such as China, the Philippines, India, Korea, Vietnam. And in my work at E4FC, I've met undocumented folks from possibly every single country on the planet. Our population is incredibly diverse. And so we encourage folks to take this into consideration and not make assumptions about who is and isn't undocumented based on simply their country of origin, their ethnicity, or nationality. That our population is incredibly diverse and demands that we look at things from that lens. As you can see, again, mentioned our total population. In terms of our youth population, we have somewhere between 1.1 and 1.5 million undocumented folks that are under the age of 18. So we do have a fairly young population overall. Every year, we've been using this figure for a while. We have about 65,000 undocumented students that graduate from high school. I imagine that number is probably higher since we've been using that number for a while. And then any given year, we have between 7,000 and 13,000 undocumented students that are enrolled in college. We don't have any accurate numbers about how many of those folks are actually able to graduate from their particular institutions of higher ed, but we imagine it's much, much lower given some of the challenges that we'll go over in a bit. In addition to that, we also wanted to mention that it really breaks down regionally, that there are some regions of the country where the undocumented population is actually growing really, really fast. Places like the South, places like the Midwest are seeing some of the largest growth of immigrants in general. And other parts of the country, that growth has really stagnated. You know, even in places like California, Texas, or the Southwest, where there's traditionally been a lot of immigrant populations, that growth has slowed. So it does break down regionally. So I wanted to take some time to go over some important legal and policy issues related to both immigration and education, since that's the intersection where we operate. So again, I'm going to go through this as quickly as I can, and these are some deeper and more complex issues, so I definitely invite people's questions to engage more in this. In terms of educational policy for our population, a really foundational piece is Plyler v. Doe. This is a Supreme Court case out of in 1982 And this is what actually prohibits states from denying undocumented folks a public K-12 education, right? The Supreme Court found that to deny anyone a public K-12 education would be to permanently relegate them to an underclass, and that was inherently unconstitutional. And so that's why we're not advocating for undocumented folks to be able to enter into high school, middle school, be able to access public K-12, because it's a value that has already been established both through our legal system and through the way that our education system has been set up. However, the case says nothing about higher ed, which is where actually a lot of advocacy is happening, does need to happen in a continuing way. And state policies, as I've mentioned, are very diverse. So we have, as it pertains against education, two major areas where states break down in a very diverse set. So one area is in-state tuition, acceptance to colleges, and then the third area is financial aid and financial support for undocumented students. So we have 6 states that offer all three. So undocumented folks can be accepted, can get in-state tuition, and can get some type of state-based aid in order to go to college. There are 18 states that offer in-state tuition but don't yet offer state-based financial aid. And then there are a few states that actually not only prohibit in-state tuition, don't offer state-based financial aid, but also limit or prohibit folks applying to or enrolling in public universities in their state. So states like Georgia, Indiana, Arizona have those types of restrictions. So again, that breaks down, and then there's a bunch of states, many states you see in gray, that actually don't have formal policies yet as it pertains to undocumented students and education. So we have certainly a lot of work to do, a lot of room to grow to make that happen. And then we have larger federal immigration issues or federal immigration policies that affect our community. So in 2012, as some of you may have heard, in 2012, the president announced an executive program called DACA, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And that went into effect, or that was announced on June 15th, 2012, which is almost 3 years ago now, which is really incredible to just think about how quickly those 3 years have passed. But this program would offer folks that are eligible an opportunity to gain 2 years, a 2-year work permit or work authorization, and protection from deportation, or deferred action as it's called, from deportation. So for folks that do qualify, folks would get a work authorization. They'd be able to use that as a federal ID, federal valid ID. They'd be able to then use that to get a social security number. And then depending on the state, be able to get things like an ID or a driver's license. And then there are other benefits of deferred action. If folks want to know what all of them are, they can go to our website to check out all the different things that DACA has made available for our undocumented community. It's renewable. We're now going through a renewal period since it was valid for 2 years. Now we're going into and seeing folks get renewed from the initial stages. One thing that's important to understand about deferred action, however, is that it's not an immigration status. So it's not an executive order. It is not a law. It is on Congress to be able to pass major immigration legislation to be able to shift or change our current policies and our current landscape. So in the absence of that, the program is providing simply that deferred action for undocumented folks, which is just protection from deportation and a work authorization, but it is not a pathway to citizenship. It cannot be used to adjust one's status, and it's not permanent. The program can end really at any point. We're hopeful that that won't happen, and that we've actually seen an expansion of that, but it is, for all intents and purposes, not a permanent solution. And there's been an expansion of that executive action that was announced in November by the Obama administration. So taking the deferred action program that was announced in 2012 and expanding that to protect the parents of U.S. citizen and permanent legal residents in this country, which the estimates were the DAPA, as it's called, Deferred Action for Parents, would affect somewhere between 5 and 6 million people, which is really a tremendous amount of folks that would now be eligible for that. Very soon after its announcement, the state of Texas, as well as joined with 26 other states, to put forth a lawsuit against the administration to say that they did not have the power to make this type of program. And so there was a court injunction on the implementation. Actually, I believe it was yesterday that the program should have or was scheduled to go into implementation, but because of the injunction, we're not seeing that. So now it's in a legal battle about whether or not the program is going to move forward, what parts of the program are going to move forward, and in what ways. It's currently in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and there will be, they've already heard arguments. We're expecting some type of progress or even decision to be made about the injunction in July. So we're hopeful that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals will turn down the injunction and will allow the program to begin implementation and for folks to begin to have access to this much needed relief. But certainly it's something that we have to continue to keep an eye on to see how this process could turn out. Again, we could have something in July, or this process could, as many legal battles do, could continue for quite a while. So that is, again, a short overview of a lot of different complex issues that are affecting our community. And I'll turn it over to Jay to talk about building community support.
Thank you very much, Jose. Hello again, everyone. I'm Jay Sherwin. I'm the co-director of the Invest in the Dream project at Educators for Fair Consideration, E4FC. As Jose has just been sharing with us, we wanted to start with an overview of some of the legal and general and political issues that affect the undocumented community. Many of you we know are just beginning to think about issues around those students, and so we wanted to start from that general point of view. But we want to move for the rest of our time together to think with you a little more specifically about your role as scholarship providers and the challenges that you may be confronting or issues that you're considering as you contemplate expanding scholarships to include undocumented students. So this next segment, we'll talk about building community support. Depending on where you are, whether you're a nonprofit community-based scholarship provider or a higher educational institution, how you can generate support and attract allies and put forward an agenda that makes a place for undocumented students to pursue higher education. So Jose, if you go to the next slide, we'll talk about 4 stages of building community support, stages of development. As I said, we know all of you come from different places, that some of you are at educational institutions, some of you are at community-based scholarship providers. We know that some of you have some experience with undocumented students and are already awarding scholarships to undocumented students. Others of you we know are just beginning to think about that. So we want to suggest that there is this continuum of organizational support for undocumented students, that you may be at some point along that continuum, and we want to just think with you about where you are and how you might get to the next stage from there. We've divided it into 4 stages, so on this slide you see stages 1 and 2. Hopefully, wherever you are along these points, there's some useful information here. So at stage 1, you're just beginning to think about this. You, as a scholarship provider organization, have not awarded scholarships in the past to undocumented students, and you're just beginning to understand the importance and the value of offering scholarships to those students. You need to understand the implications and to craft policies to make that possible. Our first piece of advice is to do your homework. As I'm sure you already all recognize, as Jose has just shared with us, it's a complex legal and political environment that surrounds undocumented students. some of the issues around scholarships for those students are themselves fairly complicated, and you can get good advice from a variety of sources, but it's important to reach out for that advice, to do the research and to understand the legal issues and the implications of making scholarships to undocumented students. We certainly encourage you to visit the E4FC website. We'll talk a few more times about that and the resources that are available there. The National Immigration Law Center is another really good resource to help understand legal issues around undocumented students. The Center for American Progress has some good research on this topic as well. But the point mostly is, as you're beginning to think about this, to spend the time to research and understand the issues, and then to educate your board members, or if you're at an institution, to educate your institutional leaders so that they understand these issues. We know from having talked to many scholarship providers that folks who are at the staff level often care very deeply about these issues. They're highly engaged. They would love to get their organizations to consider and support undocumented students with scholarships. But part of the challenge is making sure that their leaders also understand those issues. And so that's part of what we want to encourage you to do too. Once you've done some of this homework and the research to help you understand it, to look for opportunities to make the case to your board or to your leadership about what these issues are and why it's so important for your organization to contemplate scholarships for undocumented students. If you're past there, if you're at stage 2, perhaps you're already awarding some scholarships to undocumented students, but you're doing it quietly perhaps. You're doing it under the radar. We know of some scholarship organizations that tell us essentially they do this as a don't ask, don't tell policy. They don't inquire about citizenship status. They don't feel like they need to know, and so some students they support may be undocumented, but they may not know. Our point, if you're at that stage, is to encourage you to move from that sort of under the radar place to a more visible and proactive role, to make a public statement, to take a public stand that suggests that you welcome applications for scholarships for undocumented students and that you are committed to supporting those students. You recognize that those students are worthy, that those students have a place in higher education. So rather than just doing it quietly or doing it unintentionally, to move to a place where you're making it clear publicly to students themselves, of course, and to other scholarship providers, others in your community, that you feel like this is important to do. We also suggest that you think about ways to broaden scholarship eligibility for students beyond those with DACA. As Jose explained to you, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, or DACA, has opened the door for a large number of undocumented students, made it easier for them to pursue higher education. They get Social Security numbers, they get work authorizations. It's been a wonderful opportunity for some undocumented students, but it's important to remember that DACA is quite limited, and it excludes a significant number of other undocumented students who are also worthy, highly qualified, and should be considered by your organizations or institutions for scholarship. So many of you we know are at the place where you're considering DACA students, and we congratulate you for that, but we encourage you to think beyond DACA to look at other categories of undocumented students who we would strongly encourage you to also consider. If we go to the next slide, we'll talk about stage 3. Jose, if you can get us the next slide, thank you. So perhaps you're now at the place where you have made an affirmative statement on behalf of undocumented students. You're doing it visibly and intentionally. At this point, our suggestion to you is to begin to think about ways that you can really make a case to donors or others in the community to become part of this effort. There are donors we know who are very interested in supporting undocumented students, but others out there who we believe are in a great position to be solicited and approached as potential supporters of undocumented students. We have great examples, and we're happy to share them with you, of scholarship provider organizations that have done a terrific job of making the case to current or prospective donors that scholarships should be extended to undocumented students. I know of one terrific example of a scholarship provider organization that made a really positive and wonderful case for how scholarships for undocumented students honored the values of that organization, fulfilled its mission. So our point is to suggest to you that if you're supporting undocumented students but you want to grow the pot to try to attract other support for them, that there are effective ways that you can approach donors and other potentially interested supporters in the community to help them think about how that's possible. And we can offer you references, organizations, scholarship provider organizations that have done that well, and we have advice at E4FC about how you can do that as well. We also want to suggest that you look for ways to identify and cultivate allies. Once again, we have great examples from scholarship providers who have looked to others in the community to become part of a larger message around the importance of supporting undocumented students and the urgency of supporting those students. Leaderships of the public schools, of civic organizations, and maybe most importantly of all, leadership in your business community. Sometimes scholarship providers tell us that they're not certain that business leadership in their community will be sympathetic to supporting undocumented students. Some of them may be politically conservative and may be resistant to the idea of a place in higher education for undocumented students. But we have, again, great stories and great examples of community leadership, including business community leadership, that really gets this, that really understands that undocumented students are part of the community, that they represent an important resource, a talent pool that is the future workforce and even the future leadership of the community. Once again, we have great examples of scholarship providers who have gone to their local business community leaders and to their surprise sometimes have generated very strong support and affirmation from the business community about making scholarships to undocumented students. So if you're at the place where you're looking for new allies and new donors, we encourage you to think broadly about that, to think about who the unlikely allies are and to make sure that you pursue them, as well as other folks who are the more apparent allies to supporting undocumented students. And finally, stage 4, if you're at a place where you have a strong base of donor support, you're making undocumented student scholarships, you're growing the pot to support those students, our advice is to encourage you to move to a level around institutional and legislative advocacy. As you all know, as scholarship providers, scholarships are crucial, financial aid is crucial, but students need a variety of other supports to pursue college, to persist and graduate, and we encourage you to think with allies and to become a vocal advocate for undocumented students to help them overcome some of those challenges, to advocate for undocumented students at institutions of higher education, to help them understand what challenges undocumented students face, to help them put the programs and supports and services in place to help make sure that undocumented students persist and succeed. And ideally, we want to encourage you to be an advocate in the legislative arena as well. Again, we realize that based on who you are or where you are in your organization, you may be more or less comfortable taking a visible role as a legislative advocate, but we have wonderful stories and examples of scholarship providers who have really made a case to their local or state legislators about the importance of supporting undocumented students. They've resisted efforts to curtail in-state tuition or to prevent undocumented students from attending institutions of higher ed. So hopefully some of you are at the place where you're ready to take on this piece of the agenda and to work with us not just as scholarship providers, but as visible and vocal advocates for undocumented students. So I'm sure that will generate a number of questions from all of you. We look forward to hearing them. Just one more slide to give you a reminder that there's one E4FC publication in particular we encourage you to download and look at called The Case for Undocumented Students in Higher Education. available on our website. We encourage you to take a look at that. Hopefully it gives you some good advice and information. And if you're interested at any one of these developmental points on getting advice from other scholarship providers, how they've overcome some of these challenges, how they've attracted support, how they've moved into the advocacy arena, we'd be glad to put you in touch with some of your peers who are doing this, and I'm happy to make that connection with you. So let's move to the next segment. Many of you we know are thinking about ways that you can effectively serve undocumented students, how to make your scholarship application process as friendly and supportive as possible to those students, how to put the message out in the community to make those students feel safe and comfortable applying for scholarships. So we have some thoughts and advice about best practices for ways that you can attract applications from undocumented students and serve them. So Jose, let me hand it back to you if you want to talk a little bit about this list that we've generated on best practices from other scholarship providers, and I can add some thoughts after you do.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Jay. I appreciate that. So what we did in preparation for this webinar is we actually reached out to some of the scholarship providers we've been working with for a very long time, for years, that we know have really tremendous assets when it comes to supporting undocumented students. Have done it for a very long time and have become incredibly successful at it. Just to name the folks that we reached out to, both here in the Bay and nationally, Summer Search, U Aspire, 10,000 Degrees, College Track, Destination College Advising, and Beyond 12. All really amazing partners to us, both here in the Bay Area, around the state, and around the country. And we just asked them, what is it that you do that enables you to be so successful in being able to support undocumented students? So we pulled together a list of 10 things that they were all doing, and we're certainly hopeful that that can spark some ideas for all of you, some things that you could possibly do, improve, or implement at your organizations, and excited to engage in discussion about that. So the first set is here. So number one, in terms of being able to support undocumented folks, is to actually hire undocumented staff. That was one component that many organizations actually really believed in deeply and benefited them tremendously. It was actually to have undocumented folks, given, again, the opening that DACA has provided for folks to actually be able to have work authorizations and to work and be employed. They're actually hiring undocumented staff. Oftentimes it's undocumented staff that have gone through their programs, have actually received their scholarships in the past. Hello? Hello?
It sounds like
can we get a confirmation of the audio is back? Oh, okay. Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure I was come back. Okay, so back. So again, hiring undocumented staff, but also hiring staff that reflects the population of the students that folks served. That it was really helpful when the students came into the office or were applying or were calling, making inquiries, that the folks that they were in communication with also reflected where they came from, both in the community, but also nationally, ethnically, all these different things. Number two was to make sure that all staff is trained on all relevant federal, state, and local policies that impact undocumented young people. It's a lot of the work that we've done and a lot of the work that organizations have taken it upon themselves to research and develop and to make sure that there's continuity throughout the organization from the board all the way down to the folks working on the ground with students. Number three is to ensure that folks are able to create a safe space at their organization. So being as a a part of that, but also language and understanding what type of language to use, how to talk to and talk about undocumented young people, and what does the environment look like in terms of even the posters that are up around the offices, or the ways that folks speak about the issue. Number 4 is to be in collaboration and conversation with other scholarship providers that support undocumented young people. That's been incredibly powerful, as we've seen, in even pulling together our Invest in a Dream cohort from last year. And we continue to see that being a really powerful piece of practice for other scholarship providers to both reinforce the work that they're doing, but also to share practice and share problem-solving opportunities with each other. And the 5th is to be able to connect with other immigrant-serving and advocacy organizations in their region and their state. Scholarship providers are limited in the things that they can do. They're not immigration legal service providers. They can't help folks when it comes to housing or when it comes to employment issues, things like that. And so certainly they're not able to provide for any and all needs that come up. But what's been really powerful and really helpful is when scholarship organizations know, okay, who is a major immigration legal service provider in the area that I can connect to? Who is the local immigration advocate if there's a challenge with a deportation or a detention or enforcement issues that have come up for our students or our families? Here's where folks can go. Has been really, really powerful and really helpful. So to know that regionally, and also to know who are those players in your state. Every state has them. Every region has some form of this as well. Number 6 is to actually create an opening for staff to form their connections to this issue. So it looks very different. Allyship looks very different depending on who you are and depending on where you come from. So what's been really wonderful is to see all different folks come at this issue from their own lens. So both some staff members at a particular organization may have family members who are undocumented, or they themselves might have been formerly undocumented. So this is a very deep and close issue. Many folks grew up in a neighborhood where there was a lot of immigrants, or this issue was very prevalent. For many folks, it's a moral issue. For many folks, it's an ethical issue. Sometimes it's a religious issue. Whatever it is, that folks are actually provided the openness to come into this work and to connect to our population in a way that makes sense for them and in a way that is informed by their own experience as well. Number 7 is to, as Jay had mentioned, many of these organizations are engaged either at the local level, state level, or national level in larger policy or systemic change. We know there's only so much that folks can do in terms of chipping away or making some cracks in the concrete, but what we do know is there's only so much that organizations can do, and there's only so many folks we can get through those cracks. So what we really need to do is we need to engage in a process of larger systemic change for all undocumented people in this country, and that's both a larger educational system issue and a larger immigration system issue. And both systems certainly need some support and major reforms. So to continue to be engaged in that. Number 8 is to encourage folks to create written materials, even if it's only internal. It doesn't need to be really polished or really long, dense, detailed, just something so that we can continue to document learning. As one staff member learns X from working with a particular student, they're able to document it, and so that other folks can learn from it and other folks can reference it as they move forward. E4FC creates a lot of written materials. NILC, UWE, a lot of other organizations create written materials that are also able to be used, so you can often use that as platforms. Number 9 is encourage all these organizations really use really broad public messaging to demonstrate that they're supportive of undocumented folks in their promotional materials, in their website, any meetings or events that they do, outreach that they do. They really make this a central issue and make sure folks understand it. And then the last piece is actually organize conferences or public convenings where undocumented youth can come and both gain resources and also connect to the broader community. So to be able to utilize their positions as community leaders, as community conveners, to elevate this issue and to give space for undocumented folks to come in and both receive resources and receive support, but also to be able to connect more broadly. And we've seen really powerful examples of how different scholarship providers have used their role as a community partner, as a community leader, to engage all members of the community around this issue, which has been really tremendous. So that is the best practices. So I'll turn it back over to Jay, and he's going to talk really briefly about our Invest in the Dream initiative.
Great, thank you very much, Jose. Once again, as you see, lots of good ideas here, and as we realize, not quite enough time as we wish to talk about them, but we hope that we'll get some good questions from all of you around some of those best practices, or questions around best practices that we can talk about with you further. Before we closed and passed it on to Maggie to facilitate questions and answers, we wanted to just say a few words about E4FC's Invest in the Dream initiative, which I assume many of you are familiar with, but we want to make sure you know about it and encourage many of you at scholarship provider organizations to apply for funding through Invest in the Dream. So E4FC created the Invest in the Dream Fund last year in 2014 and awarded 9 grants last year to a diverse group of scholarship provider organizations and institutions around the country in a bunch of different states all over the country, a private college, a large public university, a community foundation, other community-based scholarship providers. It's a great and diverse group. Our goal is to try to grow the total pool of funds that are available for undocumented students to encourage all of you as scholarship providers to either create or expand scholarship opportunities for undocumented students. So Invest in the Dream is designed as a one-to-one matching grant opportunity. We invite you to apply to us for funding, and you need to, when you apply, show us that you can raise or have commitments to raise an equal amount of funds from other sources, so that essentially E4FC makes a grant and it's doubled by your own resources or contributions from donors or supporters, that we can increase the total amount of money available to undocumented students. We were excited about the first year with a large and impressive group of scholarship providers applying. As I said, we chose 9 around the country, and we're now doing year 2 of Invest in the Dream. We've posted the application materials on the E4FC website. The most important detail is the deadline, which is July 1st. Applications to E4FC are due by July 1st. We'll review them this summer and make grant decisions by September. As you see in this slide, the requirements that we're looking for, as I mentioned, are that you must create new scholarships or expand existing scholarships. The idea is not to simply support your current scholarship giving for undocumented students, but to help you expand it, and that it's a one-to-one match, that you must secure a commitment or resources from another source and bring that commitment to us as part of your application, and you can apply for an equal amount of funding from E4FC. We're considering grant requests from $5,000 to $50,000. The scholarships would be awardable at the end of the grant will be awardable at the end of this year. Scholarships would be made by your organization next year or over the next 3 years. We would allow you to take up to 3 years to award scholarships with the grant funds you receive from us. The scholarships can support either undergraduate or graduate students at public or private or nonprofit institutions. And we're especially excited to have NSPA members thinking about this with us and encourage you to apply. Any scholarship provider is eligible for application. So community foundations, community-based scholarship providers, 2-year and 4-year public and private colleges are all eligible to apply. And as you see, there's the URL for our website to give you more information on applying for Invest in the Dream. Some of you, I imagine, will have some fairly specific questions about your own situation or ideas that you want to run by us. Please, by all means, get in touch, and we'll be happy to think with you about how you could craft an application for us to apply for matching funds through Invest in the Dream. So we've covered the territory we wanted to in 45 minutes, and there's the final slide with our contact information. And we hope this has generated some questions and some comments from all of you. And Maggie, perhaps you can share some of what you've received with us.
Sounds great. And again, a reminder that you can submit your questions by clicking or expanding the questions tab on the bottom of your control panel. And we have received a few questions already. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the first one here. This one is from Chelsea Jones. My organization offers scholarships for undocumented students. However, not very many apply. How do we make our scholarship opportunity more visible so that more students will apply? Any suggestions of certain sites to post scholarship opportunities?
Great question. Jose, you want to start with that and I can follow you?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for the question. I think just really briefly, certainly I can go on for days about this since my role at the organization for 3 years initially was our community education and outreach program. So outreach is huge, being able to get out in the community in a strategic way and being able to make these resources meaningfully available to different community members. So I would advise kind of taking a look at your current outreach efforts, whatever those might be, any outreach materials that you produce, including your website. How available is that? Is it explicit on your website and promotional materials? And partner. I think partnership with other organizations. I don't quite know what region you're from, but one thing we'd be happy to do is be able to connect you with any local immigrant rights organization, if we know them, or any local undocumented youth advocates and leaders in the community, because they're going to know. They're the ones that are going to know where the community is and the best ways to be able to get in front of them or reach out to them so that they can apply, so that they know that these funds are available to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would add to that that Chelsea, the question is something we hear from lots of scholarship providers, and in our experience, it's not just about where you post or what your materials look like, although I certainly agree with Jose that it's important that your materials are clearly, explicitly user-friendly to undocumented students, but it's more about the kind of personal and community level outreach that helps undocumented students understand that you are looking for an opportunity to support them. Many of them assume that lots of scholarship programs exclude them, and so in some ways the responsibility is on you as a scholarship provider to put the word out in your community using partners and allies to really proactively identify students and make the case to them that you have opportunities for undocumented students and that you genuinely welcome their applications for scholarships. You need to help them overcome perhaps some of their reluctance or uncertainty about whether they're eligible, and make a very affirmative statement to your community that you have opportunities for undocumented students and you're eager to pursue them.
Great, thank you, Jay. There's another question here from.
And also, just real quickly to follow up. Oh, sorry, just very quickly, also to follow up on that, Jay, I mean, I would also encourage you to really partner and engage with the undocumented students you've already supported. I imagine they went to a high school somewhere and they live somewhere in the community, and I imagine they're not the only undocumented folks that are in those communities. So actually to be able to be in a position of learning from the undocumented youth that you've supported, to be able to engage that community and to be able to learn, where folks at, what the messaging is, what the perception is of the organization that's out there, and how you can be able to address that. So, thank you.
Yes, thank you for all that great information. Another question here from Belle. Is there any sort of information on the number of students who aren't DACA but are undocumented? Is it the majority?
Jose, do you know that data point of what percentage of students are DACA and what percentage are non-DACA?
Yeah, I mean that's a little hard to say, right? Because I think that we do have some numbers around undocumented folks within particular age brackets, but whether they're all students or not, I mean that's a kind of large issue. What we do know is that, you know, as I said before, we have between 1.5 to or 1.1 to 1.5 million undocumented folks under the age of 18. And then in terms of estimates for the Deferred Action Program, we know that about over 600,000 have already been accepted or already have deferred action status in the U.S. And it was estimated that we have a total 1.2 to 1.5 million undocumented folks that were totally eligible for the program. So if we go to the highest end, only about a third of those that are eligible have received deferred action already. And again, because of the nuances of the eligibility requirements, it's hard to ascribe any particular demographic category. For instance, we can't say that all undocumented folks under the age of 18 would qualify for deferred action, or all folks in a particular age bracket would qualify. So because there are more nuanced eligibility requirements for the program. But what we can say is 600,000 or over 600,000 have been confirmed or have DACA status, and about 1 million or a little under 1 million still are eligible, supposedly eligible, still have yet to apply for the program and be accepted.
And Jose, for students who are undocumented but not DACA eligible, it's typically because of when they arrived in the U.S. or what age they were when they arrived in the U.S. Just trying to see if we can be a little bit more informative about potential scholarship recipients who are undocumented and non-DACA.
Sure. Yeah, without getting into the actual requirements, eligibility requirements, there are a lot. So I think oftentimes what we see from folks who are not eligible is, I mean, the deadline for coming to the U.S. is a big cutoff. The age at which they came to the U.S. is a big cutoff. So you have to have come before the age of 16. So folks that came when they were 16 and a week or 16 and a month are not eligible. And also the age cutoff. So it's up to age 30. So that age cutoff is 30. That was expanded by the announcement that was made in November. The executive action for parents, deferred action for parents, also actually removed the age requirement for deferred action. So that would be older folks that would be eligible. But there's questions about that given the injunction that's currently in place. So I've heard both that the age gap is no longer a part of the DACA program. I've heard that we have to still wait on the decision from the injunction. So not entirely sure because I'm not a legal expert about all that stuff. But usually it's date of entry and age.
So, Belle, thanks for the question. I think the point we're trying to make is that there is some substantial number of students who are worthy and deserving scholarship recipients who, for fairly arbitrary legal reasons, are not included or not eligible under DACA. So that was part of the point we were trying to make, is to encourage all of U.S. scholarship providers to start with DACA, but look beyond it if that's possible.
Great, thank you. Here's a question from Crystal. How do scholarship providers deal with the uncertainty of student status? Are there steps foundations can take in advance to prepare in case there are issues down the road related to specific student and or larger political change?
All right, so let me take a stab at that, Jose. You may have further thoughts to offer. Our experience with dealing with scholarship providers who support undocumented students is that they have figured out a way to navigate those questions around student status. that, as you all know, you do not need to have legal immigration status to enroll in an institution of higher education. And so part of this is simply about recognizing that even students without legal status, that there's nothing to prevent them from attending a college or university, and that there is therefore no reason to prevent you from awarding scholarships to them. Scholarship provider organizations have determined ways that they can flexibly respond to changes in policy, either institutional policy or laws or other sort of legal barriers. If you're looking for ways to help undocumented students, the barriers are not that hard to overcome, where you can design a process that will make sure that those students can be included. At least that's what we're hearing from the scholarship providers who are currently supporting those students.
Great, thank you.
Right, absolutely, Jay. Oh, sorry, can I real quickly add?
Yes, go please, Jose.
Okay, sorry. In addition to what Jay contributed, two thoughts that I have with this, because this is a very common question. One is to make sure that folks understand how fluid immigration status is and how quickly our immigration environment and climate is changing. So even my going from being undocumented, having access to particular state-based policies that are subject to change and continue to change, and then even getting access to deferred action in a scope of only 5 to 6 years. And then we know a lot of folks in our community that actually are able to legalize, are able to gain some type of immigration remedy. So we want to encourage folks to think about this as being fluid, that immigration status is fluid, and also that immigration reform, larger immigration reform, is very needed, and we're going to continue to push for it. And that's something that our hope is on the horizon very, very soon, because we can't continue to have 12 million undocumented people and growing in the United States in the ways that we exist. The second point, I think at a much larger and I guess a bit more historical level, is to kind of think back to other groups. So undocumented folks are not the only group of people that have ever been denied access to particular institutions or opportunities or education in the United States. When we think about African American folks, when we think about indigenous folks, when we think about women, I mean, all types of communities that at one point in this country's history have been denied access to an education or denied access to meaningful and equal employment. And in those times, that they were not worthy of a particular investment, they weren't worthy of an equal education, even despite the fact that they were going into a system or into an environment that may have been impressive, that may have been exclusionary. I don't think so, and I think we haven't. I think history kind of proves that, and I think I would ground us in that as well. That just because undocumented folks are facing what they're facing now doesn't mean that they're any less deserving of investment and equal opportunity. So, thank you.
Thanks to you both. I think we might have time for one more question, and it's from Kim. As a nonprofit scholarship provider, are there any specific documents or requirements that we should ask for from undocumented students before awarding scholarships?
It's probably, it's hard to sort of answer that in general terms because the policies vary state to state. Here in California, for example, it's important for scholarship providers to encourage students, undocumented students, to apply for funding through the California DREAM Act. So in general terms, I don't think that there are documents that you need to receive from students in order to consider them for scholarships. Any other materials that you would ordinarily consider, their high school grades, their recommendations, their essays, and so forth, I guess in my mind should be adequate for you to include them as part of a larger mix of scholarship applicants that you consider. Jose, any thought for that?
Yes, yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's a little hard to answer in abstract. What I would say is important is, if possible, and again, policies, institutional policies vary, but to not ask about immigration status as much as possible, and certainly not to ask for things like work any type of like authorization or a social security number. Those are all things that, if asked for, or like if placed in some type of promotional material or website, it is a red flag for our community, and probably will mean that they won't even apply in the first place. So we want to avoid those types of conversations. From my standpoint, from like working with scholarship providers here and all around the state and the country, for legal purposes, there's no reason for folks to require a social security number in order to be able to award scholarships, at least again in my experience. There are particular examples if folks have particular donors or if folks have funding that's tied to federal programs, then I think those become more complex questions, but for the most part, I would say that you don't need anything specific in addition to the things that you require of all students.
Great, thank you so much. There are several other questions. So I wanted to give you an option, Jay and Jose, of either answering them now, or I can send them to you via email, and then we can post answers on our website when you have a chance to answer them. What would you prefer we do? I want to be respectful of your time and everybody's time.
And of course, we want to be respectful
Right.
of the time of folks who have listened in. We're certainly happy to stay with you and answer more, but we're also happy to take those questions, Maggie, and to provide some brief written answers that you could post on the website. And we'll make a copy of our PowerPoint presentation available that I know you want to be able to share with NSPA members as well.
I'm in agreement. I'm happy to stay as well.
That sounds like a great plan. So thanks to Jay and Jose and to all of you for joining us. I certainly learned a lot about supporting undocumented students, so thank you for that. This concludes the NSPA webinar today. Thank you for joining us and have a great rest of the day.